Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel, Reading Ideas. Have I got a great reading idea for you? You could think of it as part of June on the Range, and it's Louis L'Amour's Hondo. Right, excellent book, really is excellent. Now, I had a bit of a feel for, because I've read a few, at least 10, I think, Louis L'Amour's now, and they're very good. He's a very good storyteller. All Western books, so it's that time period, cowboys and Indians, absolutely fantastic. Start of America. Now, I don't know whether something had been mentioned, but I kind of had the feel that Hondo was one of his earlier books. So I went to look up his, and I'll say something in a minute. I will get around to it. I went to look up his books, how they were published in order, and I couldn't see it. I thought that's a bit strange. So I did a little bit more digging. And this is what I found. This is from Wikipedia. So L'Amour's first novel, published under his own name, was Westward the Tide, published by World's Work in 1951. The short story The Gift of Cochise was printed in Collier's 5th of July 1952 and seen by John Wayne and Robert Fellows, who purchased the screen rights from L'Amour for $4,000. James Edward Grant was hired to write a screenplay based on this story, changing the main character's name from Ches Lane to Hondo Lane, hence the Hondo. L'Amour retained the right to novelise the screenplay and did so, even though the screenplay differed substantially from the original story. This was published as Hondo in 1953 and released on the same day the film opened, with a blurb from John Wayne stating that Hondo was the finest Western Wayne had ever read. And then it goes on, during the remainder of the decade he produced a great number of novels under his own name and other names such as Jim Mayo. So that's quite interesting that, this was one of the first novels that he wrote, and I just wonder how much of an effect the structure of the story was, a little bit down to the screenwriter. Now, the structure of, that's what when I said I would get onto it, the structure of Hondo, you can kind of see that he's kind of hit on a bit of a storytelling formula. A lone person in the desert, strong of character, discipline, and then they're put into a situation where there's, he might have to rely on some people who have a good personality, and there's a kind of a good guys, bad guys. There's quite often a female interest that something for the character to kind of hope for the future, to build a kind of a relationship around. So I just wonder whether he picked up some of that structure from that early screenwriting of his short story. But when it comes to Hondo, so that's the first thing. You can kind of see a bit of an outline structure that he can then use. Now, in some... Yeah, we'll stick with Hondo for a minute. What I'm going to do is for those of you who've never read a Western, never read a Louis L'Amour, and maybe kind of thinking that, the style of writing won't be up to it, I'm going to read about a page and a half so you can see how his writing goes, because I think it's very good. So the first part of the book is quite exceptional. It's very well written. It's very well loved, and there's such a pace to it. Really interesting pace. You really get a sense of the time and the place, and jeopardy. Like I say, and it goes at a real fast pace. The second part of the book, once it said it was a kind of a screenplay, I'd sensed the difference before, but you can kind of get a bit of an idea. So maybe he kind of stretched out his book, but it's at a slower pace and a kind of a different. You can imagine it's almost written from viewing, rather than them creating the viewing from the book. The book kind of created from the viewing. I don't know if that kind of makes sense, but just kind of a slightly different tone in the second half. None the worse for it, but I just felt a different tone. So yeah, now what it looks like, and where a little bit of weaknesses of, it's like his further writing, because he produced such a lot. So he's a really good storyteller in his later books. You really get a sense of the structure, but sometimes you kind of feel that he's a bit hesitant and a bit kind of, he knows he's kind of repeating himself, and he kind of rushes it over a little bit quick. So, I've gone and forgot the term of it, but quite often in his books, there'll be moving cattle, and that's it, a brindle steer. So there'll be a brindle steer, basically lead steer, that will go to the front, and all the other cows all the cows and other steers all follow along behind. And because that's a specific thing, I've come across that a few times in his novels, and you can kind of sense that in the later ones it's kind of like, oh, I'm going to have to use that brindle steer again. So it's kind of a bit more, little bit rushed over, kind of like, well, I'll get past that, and then I'll get back, then I'll get on to some of the fresher stuff that I've come up with for a story. So in this Hondo one, because it's early, you don't get any of that, and he puts such a lot into it. It's no wonder John Wayne says it's the best novel that he's ever read. There's, the Indians play a big part, and Lamore really shows the knowledge, really shows, the landscape, the wildlife, the plant life. He puts a real lot into it, because he probably doesn't know he's going to be writing 3 or 4 of these a year and making a fortune. So it really is, I think, a superb book. Really well written, lots of detail. So if you wanted to give any of them a go, then this one could be, right up there. I assume that if people read quite a few Lamores, that this will be some of the people's favourites. So I promised to give you a taste if you're kind of wondering whether or not to do a Western, a Lamore. So here's the first page and a half. Chapter 1, Hondo. He rolled the cigarette in his lips, liking the taste of the tobacco, squinting his eyes against the sun glare. His buckskin shirt, seasoned by sun, rain and sweat, smelled stale and old. His jeans had long since faded to a neutral colour that lost itself against the desert. He was a big man, wide-shouldered, with the lean, hard-boned face of the desert rider. There was a softness in him. His toughness was ingrained and deep, without cruelty, yet quick, hard and dangerous. Whatever wells of gentleness might lie within him were guarded and deep. An hour passed and there was no more dust, so he knew he was in trouble. He had drawn up short of the crest, where his eyes could just see over the ridge. His horse crowded against a dark clump of juniper, where he was invisible to an eye not in the immediate vicinity. The day was still and hot. Sweat trickled down his cheeks and his body under his shirt. Dust meant a dust devil, or riders. And this had been no dust devil. The dust had shown itself, continued briefly, then vanished, and that meant that he had also been seen. If they were white men fearful attack, they were now holed up in some arroyo. If they were Apaches, they would be trying to close in. He studied the terrain with care, a searching study that began in the far distance and worked nearer and nearer, missing no rock, no clump of brush, no upthrust ledge. He saw no further dust, heard no sound, detected no movement. He did not move. Patience at such a time was more than a virtue. It was the price of survival. Often the first to move was the first to die. Hondo Lane took out the makings and built another cigarette. When he struck the match, he held it well back in the foliage of the juniper, keeping the flare invisible. He drew deep on the cigarette, returning his attention to the terrain. The rough-looking mongrel dog that followed him had lowered himself into the soft earth beneath another juniper a dozen yards away. The dog was a big brute, gaunt from running. It was hot. A few lost cotton ball bunches of cloud drifted in a brassy sky, leaving rare islands of shadow upon the desert's face. Nothing moved. It was a far lost land, a land of beige-grey silences and distance, where the eye reached out further and further to lose itself finally against the sky, and where the only movement was the lazy swing of a remote buzzard. So, I don't think that's bad writing, do you? And it really does have a fast pace. Exciting. Yeah, good stuff. And you get a feel of the time. Men are men, women are women, cowboys are cowboys, and Indians are Indians. Great stuff. Definitely worth a try. If you can pick up a Hondo, there should be millions of these lying around. Happy reading, everybody. Bye for now.